The movie begins with a tense 911 call. The emergency operator picks up the call, but there is no one answering on the other side. The operator keeps asking if the calling party is all right, but the only sound that she can hear from the other side is noise, screams, and distortion. We learn that 4 people named Robbie, Angela, Scott, and Michelle are found missing. Since the 8th of August, they are nowhere to be found. A title on the screen tells us that what we're about to watch comes from 3 memory cards discovered in the Mojave Desert. This means whatever happened to these characters was recorded and left behind, and we're about to uncover their story from these recordings. Card 1 is inserted into the slot, and the recording begins. We see Robbie, who is a young filmmaker in Los Angeles, gearing up for an exciting project. He ropes in his brother Scott and his friend Angela to assist in filming a music video for another friend, Michelle, out in the Mojave Desert. Before heading out, Robbie celebrates his brother's birthday. He gives his brother a fancy backpack, a bandana that belonged to their late father, and a journal to write his stories in. He also gives him a handmade locket that their mother prepared for him. As he records his brother's reaction, they joke about how he needs to be more excited for the gift, as they would be sharing this heartwarming surprise with their mother. The two laugh lightly, and then have a drink to mark this happy moment. Later, Robbie enjoys some lively moments with Michelle, who is recording her song. She looks emotionally attached to the song. Her mother used to sing it to her as a lullaby, back when she was a baby. Adding to this, the recent demise of her mother leaves the woman overwhelmed. The nerves cause her to miss a few notes, and they do a couple of retakes. Michelle has a mesmerizing voice. As the recording finishes, and they sit down to listen to the complete file, everyone is immersed into the lyrics and her voice. Robbie consoles her, and they share a heartfelt conversation, touching upon the recent loss of her mother. Later on, footage from Robbie's apartment captures the occurrences of 2 separate earthquakes. These set an eerie tone of anticipation and unpredictability before their planned expedition to the desert. The next day, Robbie visits his mother before setting off on his journey. His mother is quite surprised and gets emotional seeing him. She also complains how his brother seldom visits them. He goes to visit his friend Angela and asks her to accompany them on their trip to the desert as their stylist. The woman happily agrees. The group finally gathers at Robbie's place. They gear up and kick off their expedition, venturing into the desert. Scott drives them through the mountainous road, stopping midway to enjoy the scenery and take pictures. Angela, who is going to the desert for the first time, is the most excited. She poses cheerfully while Robbie and Scott laugh as they compete on who would throw the rocks farthest into the distance. They also come across a mine and explore the dark place. Turns out, Scott's father used to work in one back in the day. As they share this story, Michelle accidentally trips and almost falls. Thus, they decide that it is better to leave the place before they injure themselves. They resume their journey shortly after. Their first night is spent next to a serene, small lake, offering a moment of tranquility. Scott wakes up before everyone else and records the beautiful lake. Soon, the others wake up too and decide to take a swim in it. They spend the entire day there and seem to not want to leave. Robbie expresses his wish to stay there forever before the scene cuts out. Card 1 finishes, and the contents of Card 2 start playing. We see Michelle and Angela the following day, as they enjoy their time near the desert. It seems they have almost reached their destination. The 2 girls laugh and pose merrily with a signboard titled Drifting Sand. After taking a little break, they resume their journey into the vast expanse of the desert. Midway, they encounter a group of donkeys obstructing their path, causing a temporary halt. Scott gets down and drives the donkey away. Undeterred, they press on and eventually reach their intended destination. It turns out to be a modest hillside spot near a dried-out lake bed. Once there, Angela and Michelle bond further. Michelle tells her about the dress that she is wearing for her music video and how it belongs to her mother. Shortly after, they set up camp, preparing for the night ahead. Robbie tells them that they would start shooting for the music video the next day. Thus, they are free to roam around and have fun today. Michelle, Scott, and Angela go sightseeing on the other side, while Robbie goes to see the lake bed. There, Robbie finds a strange skeleton among the dried bushes. Once he is back, he finds his brother writing in his journal, while Michelle is busy with her guitar. Later, the group sits down to select props for the music video. After selecting them, they go out and take a few shots for the album cover. While shooting, Michelle gets a little overwhelmed, and they decide to take a break. Meanwhile, Robbie wanders off with the camera and finds an axe stuck to the ground nearby. This sight raises further questions and heightens the sense of unease. Soon the evening darkness draws in and animal howls eerily start echoing all around them. Wrapping up their tasks, the group decides to retire to their camps. As darkness descends, their sleep is disrupted by reverberating booms and agitated animal sounds that seem to draw nearer. Their curiosity getting the better of them, Scott and Robbie emerge from their tents, hoping to decipher the source of the commotion, but find no immediate clues. Disturbed and scared, Michelle and Angela also come out. They huddle together and look around wildly, wondering what might be happening. The thunderous sounds never stop. Angela is scared and wishes she never came here in the first place. They try their best to see what might be causing the disruption, but the dense darkness all around doesn't let them see. The girls go back to their tent. Meanwhile, driven by a sense of intrigue in a quest for answers, Robbie ventures alone, only to catch sight of an intermittent flickering light, tracing along a pathway across the nearby hill. The morning that follows the unsettling night, Robbie goes out and feels that the air has changed somehow. He concludes that the events of last night must have been caused by another earthquake. He then goes to sit down with Angela, who looks upset. She tells him how Michelle woke up crying after seeing her deceased mom. She tells the man that after the stressful events of last night, it is the last thing she needed. An emotionally bruised Robbie tries to calm her down, but she goes on and on about how unfortunate their situation is, and how he should have planned the trip more thoroughly. Later, another herd of donkeys appears. They act in the same peculiar way, just standing in a group and gazing at Robbie. Meanwhile, Scott is sprawled on one side, sunbathing and reading his journal. It seems as though he has not a single care in the world. Robbie calls out to him and asks him to help calm Angela down, since she is freaking out. He replies with a smile, saying that he bet she is. The group then gathers to exchange thoughts on the strange occurrences. Robbie tells them about the strange light he saw last night. He and Michelle venture towards the area where Robbie had spotted the mysterious light. Their exploration leads them to discover a nearby hole. The two approach it, and Robbie decides to put a mic near its entrance and record it. Much to their shock, it emits a high-pitched noise, suggesting something peculiar lurking beneath the ground. After recording, he comes down and tells Michelle about the noise. It sounds similar to listening to a seashell. Curiosity piqued, the woman sticks her head to the hole and confirms his argument. She says that it's like she can almost hear the ocean. The two hold hands and heads to the rocks, feeling the strange vibrations. It feels as though there are currents running under the rocks. Instead of feeling this situation as threatening, they conclude that it is good. On their way back, Robbie trips and falls. The woman sees and laughs at the poor man, finding the situation humorous. Before getting up, they find a strangely huge bullet shell lying nearby. They also see a rattlesnake that Michelle somehow finds cute. They converse on the way to the tents about how, since they are in the middle of nowhere, all these petty sounds seem louder and threatening to them. Adding to the oddity, Robbie also notices that his camera's battery hasn't depleted throughout their entire stay. They sit down in a corner for a bit, and Michelle tells Robbie about her dream. She had a terrible nightmare last night where strange hands strangled her, and her mother kept getting far away. She tells him how terrible it was, and Robbie shares her worries. He tells her how he also had weird dreams. The woman laughs and then thanks him from the bottom of her heart. She mentions how this music and this video means so much to her. Despite the lingering unease, they decide to proceed with filming the music video. Michelle changes into her designated clothes and jewelry as they proceed the shoot. The wind picks up and the sounds in the camera distort. They try on different angles for the shoot, from a close-up to a long shot. While recording, Robbie notices a small scratch on Michelle's shoulder. The shoot continues till the evening, and they wrap up as the lights dim. In the background, the same strange flickering light appears before the scene cuts out. Card 3 starts playing, and we see Robbie surveying the landscape before they all retire for the day. Michelle and Angela sing in their tent while trying to sleep, whereas Scott and Robbie lie down in theirs. Nightfall brings with it a sense of dread as the unsettling booms and animalistic sounds resurface. Scott wonders what they might be, and Robbie says that they could be dry lightning and thunder perhaps. After a while, driven by a mix of curiosity and apprehension, Scott decides to go out once more. He stands outside the tent for a while, looking around, and then comes back in, deciding to just ignore it all and sleep. Robbie, on the other hand, is unable to ignore it any longer. He stops his brother from closing the tent and decides to go off alone. A little distance away, the flashlight of his camera malfunctions all of a sudden and everything turns dark. When he turns his camera, he sees a strange light behind the nearby hill. Just then, in a dreadful moment, he encounters a naked man wielding the axe on the same hill. Terrified, Robbie calls out to the man, but he does not respond. Trembling with fear, he turns around and attempts to flee. However, his attempt is cut short when the poor man is attacked off camera, resulting in a head injury. Groaning, Robbie falls down and a strange light appears in the darkness and nears the camera only to vanish altogether. Returning to the campsite, disoriented and bloodied, Robbie goes to the women's tent. Clearly not in his senses, he tells them that his head is raining and the women freak out. Angela looks back at him in shock, visibly distressed and frantic. It is a stark contrast to the serene atmosphere they had initially hoped for on this expedition. He then returns to his tent, telling Scott how the sky opened up. He receives no response. Turns out that Scott actually fell asleep. How could this man sleep so soundly when his brother took off in the middle of the night, with the camera all alone? Robbie extends his bloody hand and traces Scott's back, painting a light crimson line. The screen cuts and chaos ensues. In a harrowing sequence, the camera captures Robbie sprinting frantically through the desolate desert with the two terrified girls crying out, pleading for their lives. It seems that what attacked Robbie earlier has now invaded their campsite. Blood splatters everywhere as something slashes at them in the dark. Robbie hides with the camera in a corner as screams of terror and pain echo in the background. Moments later, he gets up and runs once more. The blood-smeared path leads him to a screaming Angela. The woman is drenched in blood and groaning in pain. Disoriented, she asks him what is going on. The freaked-out Robbie can only beg her to calm down. Despite trying to remain calm himself, the disturbing sight prompts Robbie to flee, seeking refuge in a small ravine until daybreak. The next day, he emerges from the place, disoriented, and with only a pair of shorts. He groans in pain after touching the wound on his head. The blood has clotted and covers almost half of his head. Outside, he calls out to his friends as he wanders aimlessly through the desert. As he moves forward, he encounters a nightmarish scene. Strange, flesh-like, worm creatures infest the once desolate area. Narrowly escaping the living nightmares, he runs through the desert in search of his friends. The once dry desert now seems to be splattered in crimson blood. He also finds a bloodied flashlight and remembers how he abandoned his friend who was crying for him to stay last night. Overcome with guilt, he keeps chanting, "I am sorry," again and again. In the background, the same thundering noise starts echoing once more. Returning to the campsite, a scene of horror unfolds as the two tents are coated in gore, with what appears to be Michelle's lifeless form lying nearby. Trembling, Robbie runs out of the camp. There, he receives a voicemail from his mother, who is worried sick about him and his brother. She cries as she mentions the bad dream that she had about them. Robbie takes off his shorts and abandons the camera as he wanders off. After a while, he comes back, telling himself that he found something. Taking the camera, he wanders off once more. The events of the past 2 days leave the man helpless. He calls out for help and keeps reminding himself of his name. That night, he sees the same unknown assailant from before. This time, however, he is not attacked. After taking pains and praying in his heart, he finally manages to brush off the bloodthirsty monster. As he hides behind some bushes, the same flickering light from before appears. He is transported by the strange, otherworldly light to a pool of crimson liquid. His heart beats loudly in his chest as the strange atmosphere assaults his senses. He spends the entire night there in utter torture and disgust. The next day, he is thrown back into the light of the desert, where he vomits a pool of disgusting blood. The poor man starts experiencing intense physical distress and extracts an unfamiliar, flesh-like substance coating his skin. It must have been the result of spending the night in that torturous den. The same terrifying flesh-like snakes roam the desert. After running around for a while, Robbie cannot take it anymore and breaks down. He screams and cries while running to escape this torturous hell. It is a wonder how he held out for this long without breaking down. All of a sudden, he hears the donkeys. He rushes towards the noise and encounters the herd of donkeys again. He calls out to them. As he nears the animals, they turn around and leave before he can reach them. He roams around, and after a while, witnesses a mind-boggling sight. Out in the distance, he sees a group of 4 people just arriving at the desert. Nearing the scene, he finds that it is none other than their group, or more like a playback of himself and his friends traversing the desert, akin to when they initially arrived. Crazed, he calls out to Scott, screaming, but to no avail. The group vanishes and Robbie is once more caught up in wandering the desert. He roams around to find strange dents and holes in the ground. All of a sudden, his perspective shifts as he comes across a blood-soaked Michelle lying on the dried desert floor. He rushes towards her, and the woman gets up, darting across the dried lake bed, compelling him to pursue her. He rushes after her, but it seems that no matter how fast he runs, she always seems faster. He cries, chanting for her to come back again and again, as he rushes towards the vanishing form of the woman. Just as he finally catches up to her, she seems lifeless. He lies down near the body. Moments later, Michelle gets up and runs once more. Robbie pursues her. As he rushes after her with the camera, it hauntingly resembles the way that he was recording her for the music video. That night, he once again starts to hear the screams of his friends. Once again, he hides in a corner with the camera. His hand seems to be smeared with fresh blood. As he looks at it, the same flickering light appears once more. The screen cuts, and we see him rush towards the campsite after hearing Michelle's voice. She is singing the song that she recorded in the beginning. The voice gets louder as he gets nearer and nearer to the camp. Trembling, he enters the camp, but only to be met by a chaotic, bloody mess. Further unsettling encounters unfold as he stumbles upon a bloodied Scott who is lying inside. His eyes flicker open, and he blinks twice before sitting up. He asks Robbie about the noise outside, seemingly unaffected by the ghastly events. When Robbie doesn't answer, he unzips the entrance and goes out despite Robbie's protests. Turning his camera around, he sees Angela, who is also bathed in blood. She also seems clueless, just like Scott. The woman looks back at Robbie and pleads that she does not want to stay here any longer. This chills Robbie to the core. He is unable to distinguish whether what he sees is real or just an illusion. Frantically, the terrified man begins praying out loud. His chants and prayers are drowned out as Angela continues crying without pause. Meanwhile, the noise outside also does not abate. All of a sudden, Robbie hears a terrifyingly familiar voice calling out his name and crying. He swiftly exits the tent and goes out. However, instead of the desert, Robbie finds himself transported to a familiar location. A surreal journey strangely takes him to his mother's house. There he hears a crying voice. Still praying out loud, he looks around and finally finds the source of the cries. It turns out to be his poor mother. The pitiful woman is smeared in blood. Hearing him approach, she turns around and breathes a sigh of relief, telling him how glad she is that he is back home. Their reunion is cut short with the arrival of the menacing light. He sees the light, and all of a sudden, he is transported onto the wing of an aircraft. There he sees the plane smeared in blood. Through one of its windows, he catches sight of Scott, adding to the disorienting and inexplicable nature of his experiences. Scott looks back at him, without so much as uttering a word. Robbie sees his brother reach out to him by putting his hand on the mirror. His heart breaks into a million pieces as he watches it, and he cries, telling Scott how much he loves him. The flickering light appears once more, transporting him between time and space. Nothing seems real anymore. He sees a strange woman who chants how they are alive, only to vanish the next moment. He approaches the place where the woman once was and sees an abandoned flashlight. Grabbing it, he turns it off. He watches his surroundings and sees a stain of blood in the dry desert. While inspecting it, he catches a glimpse of someone in the background. When he looks closely, he sees the frame of a naked, blood-smeared man walking slowly. Feeling a little hopeful, he approaches the man. To his horror, in the pitch-black darkness of the desert, the man unexpectedly turns into a towering, monstrous figure. The beast scrutinizes him closely and seems to beckon similar creatures in the distance. Fearing for his life, Robbie flees, only to reunite with Angela back at the campsite. She seems dazed and lost. As they huddle together, all of a sudden, their moment of reunion is shattered, and they come under attack by the nightmarish worm-like creatures. Terrifying slashing noise fills the air with an ominous vibe. These creatures creep up on them and wrap themselves around the screaming duo. Despite their attempts to free themselves, they are fully enveloped within the grips of these creepy creatures. In a horrific turn of events, Robbie is carried away by an unseen force. It transports him to a place where he sees the axe stuck to a wall, and then back into the pool of red liquid. The scene rushes through a series of rapid transitions amidst white lights before returning to the barren desert. Here, Robbie stumbles upon an aged sign marking the area as off-limits by the government. Breathing hard, he looks around. Just near the signpost, there seems to be a gas mask lying on the ground. He takes a few steps forwards, and his uncanny journey continues as he encounters his assailant. Upon closer inspection, he finds out that the man is an ominous doppelganger of himself, holding an axe. This makes him question his own sanity even more. Were all the dreadful things his own doing? Was he the one that has been haunting himself from the start? And his friends, did he do all that to them? His mind swims with horrific thoughts as he escapes the place. As the terrible narrative unfolds, the following day brings more ghastly discovery. Robbie is confronted with the grim sight of his three friends' decomposed heads, impaled on pikes. This breaks his already shattered spirits even more. He says his farewell to them and then turns around. As he walks back, totally crazed, he discovers a tooth from a massive creature lying on the ground. In a disturbing act, he uses this tooth to sever before further inflicting fatal harm by disemboweling. The movie ends with a haunting image. A fatally wounded Robbie, with his guts falling out, walks forward. In a final, desperate gesture, he reaches his hand out towards the sky, leaving the audience with a sense of eerie and unresolved conclusion to this nightmarish tale.